Hello and welcome to the Chakra Way Meditation Podcast. Today I'm joined by Sylvia Wolfson, and Sylvia is a grief author. I think this is such an incredibly important subject, that of grief. And Sylvia is also a grief educator. She's also, there's lots of alsos with Sylvia, women of many talents, a Pilates teacher and a mindfulness practitioner. So that really speaks to me in terms of the very beautiful holistic approach that Sylvia takes to helping people travel through grief, because that is what you have to do. You don't get over it, you have to go through it. And this is the conversation today. So, welcome, Sylvia. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me on your wonderful show. It's an honor, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation, Roseanne.
Yeah, so I suppose we need to go back into the roots of how you got into this, and it's inevitable that you probably experienced a certain, probably considerable amount of grief. And so tell me a little bit about your story and how you came to become a grief educator.
Yeah, so you are right. I have been through grief quite a lot in my life. It's been like a thread in my life. So when I was a child at 7, I lost my dad suddenly of a heart attack. And 10 years later, my younger brother died suddenly in a car crash, a road accident. And then I spent years, decades really being completely at the mercy of grief because back then, that was 30 years ago, there wasn't really much support. And
Mm,
before COVID, my older brother also died in a road accident suddenly. And that was really a turning point. That really broke me because it felt like this couldn't be, this must be the wrong family, not again. And more
yeah.
recently, my mom died. So long story short, I did therapy, and my therapist, who was lovely, was very intrigued by all that grief story. And
Mm,
then one day she said to me, this is not my place to say that, but you have clearly experienced grief more than the average person, yet you
mm,
carry so much hope and kindness and love for life. I think you have a clear mission here. You need to share your experience. You need to help other people find hope in their grief. And when she said that to me, I was very reluctant, almost defensive. I said, absolutely not. No, thank you. I have enough grief in my life. I don't want to have
yeah.
other people's grief on top of that. I was shying away from everything related to grief. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to have more of it in my life. And that day I walked home, and it took me about 20 minutes. And somehow, the magic of the outdoors and of a good walk, by the time I got home, it was evident. I knew she was right. I knew that not sharing my experience would just be selfish, and
Mm.
that I was actually, given that opportunity, I have the possibility. So that's how it started. That's how I started to decide to make it my work, my
Mhm.
line of work.
Yeah. And it's wonderful when somebody says something that is actually really true and they can see it, and you go, no, no, I couldn't
Mm.
possibly. And then suddenly it's just like, oh, yeah, actually, that is exactly right. Gosh, so from there, you've developed your I mean, you've got this foundation of real lived grief, but then you've gone on to become an educator and a Pilates teacher and mindfulness practitioner. So, what was the first thread that you pulled on when you made that decision? How did you start to go about it? So, how did you build up what was going to be your modalities, I suppose?
Yes. So, I've been working in the coaching world for many, many years, over a decade now. So, I was a personal trainer, Pilates instructor, and then a life coach for many years. And very often, because of my backstory, my history, people with grief would come to me. So, it's something that I had already kind of done. I just hadn't put a
Mm,
label on it, and I hadn't
right.
decided to go in 100%. So, I was already set up, as a coach, as a life coach, and life and death are, both ends of the same spectrum. And the skills that I'm trying to show people and share with people to help them go through grief are life skills. Once you integrate, once you understand these skills, you can apply them to any challenging situation in life. Grief is probably one of the most challenging ones, but life is full of challenges. And so these things that help us regulate, understand our emotions, manage our triggers. And it's basically, regaining some kind of agency and some
Mm,
kind of capacity for decision making. And these are things that we always need when life gets difficult. So
mm,
I help with grief, and people always ask me, do you help with all sorts of grief, like losing a job, going through a divorce? No, not anymore. Now I'm really focused on the loss of a loved one. And for people who, have lost a loved one, but who have no choice but to show up, either
mm.
high responsibility jobs or mums or
Yeah.
carers or medical professionals. You just don't have the choice. You can't just
Yeah.
take 6 months off. And for these people who show up, who do what needs to be done, but who feel that they're on edge, something is not quite right, something is off, that's where I can help.
Mm. What an incredibly valuable thing to be doing. Now, one of the things that I was really struck by in your on your beautiful, very clear and clean website was the fact that you have delved into the neuroscience of grief. So I think that that's always for somebody who's experiencing grief to have some kind of rational scientific explanation as to why they're feeling the way they're feeling and what's actually going on. Like, what is this grief? Because grief just comes like a big storm and just like woof, and it'll get you, and then you're fine for a bit, and then again woof, just woof, sinks into you. So what is going on in the body, in the brain, that it needs to be understood so that that feeling and those sensations can be rationalized?
Yes, and that's exactly what it is. Understanding the principle is not going to make it disappear, but I found it
Mm,
very helpful. So, first, I decided to dive into the neuroscience because I've always loved data, figures, numbers, and when everything around you seems to collapse and crumble, this is something I hold on to. You like figures, numbers, research, science. It feels like something stable, in that moment. And what it has helped me to was not only to understand what was going on in my head, also to validate my experience,
mm,
but it has also connected me to my humanity and other people's humanity, to that togetherness. It has helped me to understand that what I thought was uniquely individual to my experience of grief is actually something that happens to most people, and there is an explanation for that. And that felt very comforting to understand that, that togetherness in grief. And so the one thing, for example, that I found super helpful to understand about the neuroscience of grief is that our loved ones are extremely important for us, for our system, our nervous system. Our loved ones help us to co-regulate, and they're just as
mm,
important as food would be or water would be. If suddenly we have no more water, there's going to be a really strong discomfort, misunderstanding, and stress and threat, in our life. And that's what happens when our loved ones die. The whole system feels threatened, and so then we are on a fight or flight response. And the interesting thing is that whatever relationship we have in our life, we have a three-dimensional map in our brain that is associated with that person, and it's time, space, and connection. So if I ask you, do you have children, Roseanne?
yes, I do.
Yes, yes. So if I ask you, where are your children right now? You'll probably be likely to tell me where in space they are. And if I
Mhm,
say, when will you see them again? Or when will you interact with them again?
mhm,
You will have a timeline, roughly. Or
mm,
if one of
mm,
your children goes away on holiday, you will know when you are supposed to hear from them. And if
mm.
within 2 hours you haven't heard from them, you're going to get worried because
Yeah.
that's your map in the brain. And then
Okay.
there's the closeness of the relationship. You will be way closer to certain people, family members, spouse, best friends, than you will be to your favorite barista, even if you see your barista every day. And if your
Yeah.
barista goes away, you're not going to expect to hear from them in time and space. You don't expect to know where they are and when you're going to see them again. So we have that very precise map that the brain has been building over the years. It's really embedded in our brain, and when someone dies, there's like a glitch because the map is still here, very, very vivid, but the reality has changed. And so whenever there is that dilemma, that confrontation, that friction between the map in our brain, and anyone grieving will be able to relate to that. That urge to call them quickly. Oh my God, this is so funny. I'm I'm going to tell mom, she's going to laugh. Oh, my brother's going to love that. And then you realize, oh, but hang on, I can't. They're not here anymore. That's when the wave hits. And that's because the brain, the map in the brain has not adapted yet to reality. And it takes time. It takes time because, I thought sometimes, why can I not just put it in my head that my brother's dead? Why do I have to go through all that suffering again? Like I've done it before. I've lost my dad. I've lost my younger brother. Why can this experience not spare me some of the suffering? These are the thoughts you have when you're really in the midst of grief. But it's because the brain is a prediction machine more than a processing machine. So the brain has
Yeah.
predictions. And it's only with lived experience of these predictions being false that we will slowly recalibrate the brain. So, a person who's lost their spouse, for example, it will take a certain amount of mornings to wake up in a bed without them for the brain to understand that this is the reality now. But it takes months, years sometimes. So the brain needs time to recalibrate. And just that knowledge, just understanding that we're not bonkers, we're not mental, there's nothing wrong with us. We just need to give our brain time to process this. I found it super helpful.
That is very helpful. That is incredibly powerful, actually, to understand what's going on in the brain. And as you're speaking, my my brain was going, why is it after all of these years of evolution, of losing people, has our brain not learnt to catch up with reality and go and flick the switch? But clearly it doesn't. So that's a pointless question. But I think it's a really useful thing to know that your brain is just playing catch up.
Yes.
And it's
And I think your
almost like,
question is a good one. I think it's a very valid question to ask. Why does it take so much time? It's because
mm,
neuroplasticity is slow.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah, exactly. But also there's that, it brings to mind for me that duality that we have within us of the me and myself that's listening. Or the me inside that's listening to the voice out, in my brain. There's that duality that's within us. So it's like the soul listens, or the spirit listens to the chatter of the mind and then has to discern what's true and what's not. And it's kind of like I'm trying to work out which side of that part of the brain it is that knows and accepts, and the bit of the brain that's in denial and goes, no, we're still expecting to be able to call mum whenever I want to and have a natter, and I can't. Yeah, it's a heartbreaking part of being human. And I think, the importance about around this conversation is that in Western society, we don't have many rituals around grief. And I think that on the whole, people don't actually know how to behave around somebody who's had and experienced a really serious loss. They'll send a card or flowers, they'll show up to the funeral, and then they'll give that person probably a wide berth for a couple of months because they actually, not because they don't care, but because it puts them in a state of discomfort. But they just don't know what to say. They don't
That's
know
it.
what the right thing, they don't want to put their foot in it. They don't know whether you know, whether their nervous system is strong enough to go, you must be missing so and so so much, and then have this person fall into a puddle of tears in front of them. It's it's a really tricky, for a lot of people, it's a really tricky thing, how to deal with that. So I want, I think that this conversation around grief and death and dying is an incredibly valuable part of our bigger conversation, and we should have this conversation, before we lose loved ones, just so that everybody is on the same page. But in terms of, I mean, I said at the beginning that grief is something that you have to go through. You can't go over it or around it. What are your, because I know that like me, and this is why I really love what you do, Sylvia, is that you are very much mind, body, spirit. It's a very holistic practice that you offer. So how does that work? How does that show up in your practice, this holistic work and practice?
Well, People always ask, oh, if there was one thing, if you had one bit of advice, if like
Mm,
one recommendation, what would it be? And what I always recommend is, if everything gets too overwhelming for your feelings, for your emotions, for your soul, and for your heart,
mm,
tend to your body. Start there. Start with your body. Look after your body. Move slowly, gently, and that can just be breathing. And look after your body. Fuel it the right way. Make sure it's hydrated. Have a sleep routine. Get some fresh air. Be outdoors in nature. Look after your body, and that will help you, reach your heart and your soul, because sometimes
mm.
it's just too hard. Like you say, grief is like a wound, and grief is actually, if you look at it from a neurological perspective, I read that in Dr. Lisa Schulman's book. Maybe your audience would be interested. It's called Before and After Loss. It's a neuroscientist perspective. She lost her husband, and she talks about, her personal experience and all the neuroscience around it. And she explains that grief in the brain alters the physiology of the brain like a physical injury would. So our mind and bodies are connected. So yes, so it alters the brain. And even from a whole, body's perspective, people who lose a loved one, the risk of a heart attack is, I think, on the day they lose a loved one, something like 20 times higher, which is
Yeah.
ridiculous. And then
Yeah.
over the next couple of months, 2 or 3 months, it's still 2 to 3 times higher.
Mm,
The immune system is weaker, inflammation is higher. So it really does affect the body. So tending to the body is one thing I would recommend. And then also to see the body as a wound. Yeah, this was my point. So, some wounds will
mm,
heal on their own. They will heal. It will take time, but they will slowly find their way to healing. But some wounds will not heal on their own. And the problem is that a wound that doesn't heal doesn't just remain as it is, it festers. So I
mm,
always invite people who are going through grief to ask themselves, how is my grief going? Does it feel like it's slowly getting better? And by that I mean, do you have more and more moments of relief, more and more moments where grief softens? Are they, longer? Are they more intense? Do you find a bit of joy? Do you find yourself laughing a bit more often? Or
mm,
do you find that all of this is not happening at all? And in that case, please do seek help. But they did studies on resilience and how people heal from grief. And surprisingly, over 50% will be able to go through their grief journey and will find their way through. And that doesn't mean that it's not painful, but they find
mm,
the resources within themselves. So it's just like a wound. Some wounds will heal on their own and some won't.
mm.
So yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just so yes, obviously some people need support. So we've got this the body part of it is the part that I find really fascinating because people usually the term heartbreak is reserved for romantic loss, but grief is a heartbreak, an absolutely broken heart. And I've seen this. I mean, actually, just recently, a friend of mine lost a pet, and I know that that can be as painful a grief as
Oh,
any.
yes. Oh, yes.
And very beloved, long-lived, and very shortly after, he developed a small heart issue, and I'm like, yeah, it's a broken heart. It's you
Mm,
literally your heart is broken, and that's why it's the physiology of emotions is so vital to understand, and to actually notice where you're feeling this grief in your body. And it's not necessarily pleasant, but it's an interesting thing to do. And this is with any uncomfortable emotion. It's like, well, where is it in my body? Because usually we just go, oh, it's all up here in my brain. And I just feel like, X, Y, and Z. I feel all sorts of shades of horrible. But if you can actually go, okay, close your eyes, where is it sitting? Oh, it's sitting right in the pit of my stomach, or it's sitting in my throat, or it's sitting, in my eyes, or it find where it is. And then it's a but I find with grief, certainly in the chakra system, when I'm working, which is my modality, working through the chakra system, that grief is held in the lungs. And I don't know if this correlates with your research. And so breath work and actually taking deep breaths and actually really encouraging, because the heart and the lungs just go, "Ugh," and they seize up. And I've seen it. Another friend had a heartbreak. It was a romantic heartbreak, but the the effect on their breath, and they were like literally just like gasping for air, just in everyday life. 6 or 8 weeks later, still just like. And it's the physical side of this is utterly fascinating. So how do you work with that side of things?
It is, you're right. And just the realization of that can be super helpful because
Mm.
grief, just like you just mentioned, it does not happen as an emotion first. It happens as a sensation in the body. When you're hit by a wave of grief, it usually starts with a tightness in the chest and difficulty breathing. This is where it's located. So breathing, breath work does help. Moving slowly does help. And the fact that you mentioned the lungs is really interesting because just to share a personal anecdote that this reminded me of. So my brother died just before COVID, and after lockdown, I went to my acupuncturist, Chinese acupuncturist, and I didn't tell him what had happened. I just said, "Oh, I want a little, reset," and he put the needles in, was having a little bit of small talk, and then suddenly he put a needle somewhere around my calf. And I started crying like a fountain, but I wasn't even sad, or it just felt like such a relief. And he looked at me, he was a bit shocked. He was like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And I said, "Well, actually, I am, but I just can't stop crying." And I cried and cried and cried. And I said to him, "What did you just do?" And he was like, "Oh, well, I just put this in your leg." I said, "But what is it?" He said, "Oh, it's the lungs." I said, "But what is it?" He said, "It's grief. Does that make sense to you?" And then I told him, I said, "Well, it does make perfect sense because I'm grieving very much." But it was such an interesting reaction. So it really reminded me of what you just said.
Yeah, connecting. Acupuncture is really powerful in terms of, you don't need to understand it, just let it happen. It's wonderful. But, in the same way that, you can be intentional with yoga practice. So, obviously pranayama and breath work is a big part of any yoga practice. And so and heart opening and heart protection and all of these things can be really really useful to work through. So how do you use your physical, because you're Pilates, which is kind of like a adopted daughter of, of yoga. there's
It
very,
is.
they run very parallel, close, but yeah.
Yes, yes.
How do you use the body?
Yes, so I like the first thing I would recommend, I try to make it really accessible because people grieving are very overwhelmed
Mm.
and they're extremely tired. Grieving is exhausting because the body, the whole system feels threatened and is in a very strong fight or flight or freeze response. And the body reallocates the energy towards that threat. So there's really not much left for anything else. So
Mm.
even understanding concepts and principles can be a bit too overwhelming. So I try to keep it very simple. So starting with the body, do like, pick three, hydrate, eat whole foods, get morning daylight, and, just try to be outside, things like that. And then when it comes to breathing, depending on the experience of people with breath work, because some people really have never even thought about using their breath to
Yeah.
help themselves. So I will just say exhale for longer than you inhale,
Mm.
because when the wave hits, it's hard to think straight. And someone who is not familiar with breath work, I will just say that, don't hyperventilate. Don't
Yeah.
like take deep breath in without exhaling. Try to inhale, but then exhale for longer as you inhale. And then we'll go a little bit more into different techniques when they feel familiar with that. And then in terms of movement, the Pilates I'm teaching is really very gentle, very slow. It's not a workout. I always say to people, go to the gym if you can. This is not a workout. This is just to keep the joints lubricated, and to just tune into the body and to
Mm.
move slowly, mindfully while you're breathing, because this does signal safety to the body. And so we use the body to reset the nervous system. And this is also valid, you know, for when there is inflammation, or because again, when the body feels threatened, the energy is allocated elsewhere towards that threat. And there's not much energy left even for healing internally on a physiological level. So moving slowly, lying down in a Shavasana position, you know, this signals the body, I feel safe. This is why I lie like this, exposing my chest, my hips. And these are really very simple ways to help oneself through the body. And it's not even a matter of believing. This is not woo woo. This is, you know, it's almost mechanical. So
Mm.
if you do, it's going to, even if you didn't want it to work, it would work because the body will talk to your soul, to your mind, and to your heart.
Mm. Yeah, that mind body connection is incredibly powerful. And I think more and more people are beginning to understand that, you can use your body to control how your mind is feeling, or to influence how you're feeling within yourself. So that brings us to the third part of your practice, which is the mindfulness part. And it's an interesting thing with mindfulness because it's quite a broad spectrum. You can go the CBT kind of route, or you can just go, yeah, I'm just going to drink this cup of coffee really mindfully and just enjoy every sip. Um, and I'm imagining, given what you've told me already, that the mindfulness that you at least begin with your clients is really beautifully simple. So talk to me about that.
Yes, yes, exactly. And you know, also to maybe make that distinction between mindfulness and meditation, because it
Mm,
sometimes get confused. So
yeah.
meditation is a form of mindfulness, but it's not the only one. And I find that particularly in grief, sitting still in silence with our eyes closed can be very triggering for certain people. You know, it can bring up trauma and old memories, and it can be more distressing than helpful. So,
Mm,
mindfulness is really the idea of being present in the moment without judgment. And meditation is a way to get there. But mindfulness can really start, like you say, just by holding your cup of tea, enjoying the smell of it, just noticing, you know, the sun outside, or the birds chirping, or just to be in the present moment. That would be like an introduction. I find that guided meditations can help as well. You know, when you listen to someone talking you through, and you would know you offer a lot of beautiful guided meditations. Um, and then on maybe a more pragmatic, less spiritual level, I would invite people to check into their emotions and to really make an intentional effort to develop their vocabulary about their emotions and to label them, to make an effort to have the, you know, the wheel of emotions on the fridge or on their phone, and to just really check in several times a day. How am I feeling right now?
mm,
Could include, you know, like you mentioned, where in my body do I feel it? But starting with, how do I feel right now? Because we are very limited in the way we describe our emotions, you know, from I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm happy, I'm tired. But there is a huge array of words that we can use. And this is a skill, whoever I talk to, I will always say, share it, particularly with the younger generations around you. If there's something we can do to help adolescents and children, it's to give them words for their feelings. Because the better we are at naming our feelings, the better we get at understanding ourselves. And the beautiful ripple effect of that is that we get better at understanding others. And these two skills, understanding ourselves and others, are what will make the world a better place, I believe.
that's so beautiful, Sylvia. You're so right. I think that I mean, I know that I went through many years, decades, without the vocabulary to understand my emotions. And and finding those words, finding the vocabulary is incredibly powerful. And I actually found an app. So if anybody, I don't know, I'll see if I can find this app because I love it. It's called How We Think, How We Feel, something like that. And it's
Okay.
basically got a lovely wheel. There it is. I haven't downloaded it for a while. So, um, but it gives you a sort of array, and it gives you sort of high feelings, quiet, and sort of quiet
Oh,
feelings and big
yes,
feelings.
yes.
And then so you've got the
Is it?
four
Yes.
quadrants, and it's
Hmm.
just beautiful to
Yes.
just check in and just like, oh, there's all these incredible words that
Yes. This is
it.
the incredible work by Mark Brackett from Yale University. The Center
Ah,
of Emotions. Yes, Mark Brackett. So if people look up Mark Brackett, they will find the ad. Super cheap. It's a one-off payment, I think, a
yeah.
fiver or a tenner. Yeah, you're right. It's an amazing app. Yeah, thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, no, I give this to a lot of my clients, but I use it. Obviously, I haven't used it for a while because I'm having to download it now. But but it is incredibly powerful that to have the words to describe and
Hmm.
journaling, actually writing down how you feel, getting it out of you. That's often. Do you recommend that to people who
Oh,
are
yes.
grieving? Yeah.
Yes, that's a very foundational pillar to journal. Also, because when you're grieving, it feels all consuming. It feels
Mm,
ever present. You feel like you're always in pain. You're
yeah.
always sad. You're always, grieving. And journaling helps you notice. I would recommend people to sit down in the evening and write down when was grief, at its strongest today. When did it soften a bit? And what triggered these two situations? And then over time you get a pattern. So whenever you feel like I'm always in pain, well, we're never always in pain. There might have been a moment where, you smiled at your child or you enjoyed playing with the dog. And so write these moments down to get a pattern and to
Mm,
remind yourself that it's not all suffering. A little bit of light comes in, and over time, hopefully, it's more and more and more.
yeah.
And journaling helps to just track this in a nice way.
Yeah, yeah, no, it is. I mean, journaling is powerful for most of our development and our inner world work. But there's a well-known sort of trope of the, is it seven phases, five phases of grief that we go through? And the one that I think strikes me as the sort of as a big one is the anger is and it's an anger of like, why did I lose them, why did this happen to me, but also I feel like there's a lot of people who have anger at everybody else getting on with their lives feeling quite fine, and it's like, do you not understand what is happened? I've lost this person and life's never going to be the same again, and you're just playing tennis. How could you do that? Is that some, again, a phase, a thing that you find people
Yes.
struggle
Yes,
with?
anger is very present. The five stages of grief
Five.
are not really applicable to everyone because they were coined by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she was actually talking about people who were dying. So it was not about people who were grieving, and it's kind of been put out there in, to the general public, and it's been popularized. But sometimes people in grief feel a bit lost because they're like, but I don't have that. Well, it doesn't apply to everyone. Some people might find that, but others might not, and that's okay. Anger, however, is a really interesting one because anger, I find it's not an emotion as such. Anger is always something else in disguise. Anger will
Mm,
be the expression of fear, of
yeah.
frustration, of sadness, of insecurity. Like anger is here for something else, and there
Mm,
can be the anger towards the person that we've lost. And this is
mhm,
actually also kind of a normal neurological response because in real life, if you're upset at someone, you're going to have a fight with them and make things better. You're going to go and see your spouse and be like, how dare you? How could you, leave me alone? Like, what are you doing? And this will normally resolve the situation. So the brain is kind of looking for ways to resolve the situation. And
mm,
in real life, anger could be one of these situations. So it's a normal feeling. It doesn't mean that we are really genuinely mad at them and we love them less. Absolutely not. And then
yeah.
there's just that, again, that anger towards other people who just keep going with their life, and it's that frustration and that feeling of helplessness,
Mm,
like I can't stop life from going on, but my world has stopped completely. So anger is very present, but it's always the expression of something else, and anger is not negative. Anger is a very strong energy. And what I would try to do is to use that energy towards something else. See if you can transform it into something, like go for a run or go for a brisk walk, or start painting something, or like use that energy. Don't try to push it away, because it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to come back. But try to transform it and use it for something that is less painful.
Yeah. Yeah. What are the other things that you find people struggle with most in their grief? I mean, I know it's probably a stupid question. That's my speciality. Um, I mean, obviously there's just like this deep sadness that never seems to go. I mean, that seems to be the one that is the most challenging. It's just that kind of and do people come to you and just go, when will this end? How will I ever feel
Mm,
normal again?
yes, yes. And the sadness will always be there, maybe less and less often, but the intensity will probably remain the same. I think there's also a societal issue where in our Western world, we are not really taught how to handle this.
Mm,
I happen to have lived in Buddhist countries for the past 2 years, and in Buddhism, there is a very strong notion of impermanence that is taught from a very young age. Nothing ever remains the same. And we almost do the opposite in our cultures. We almost learn to hold on to things, to keep that. Like if someone gives you a present, you're going to put all your effort into keeping it as in the same state, because that's your love language. It shows that you care for the person who gave it to you. And so we kind of learn that permanence is a love language, whereas nothing is ever permanent. So that creates a lot of suffering.
mm,
And the suffering as such is not the problem. Suffering is part of life, and suffering is usually, a different channel of love. We suffer for what we've loved, what we've enjoyed. So suffering is not an enemy. We can actually, embrace suffering in a meaningful and joyful life. There can be suffering. It's part of it. What is challenging, and this is what people don't always understand or pinpoint or notice, is when the suffering just jumps at you. It's these waves, like you mentioned earlier, these triggers that just hit you and ambush you out of nowhere. That's the challenge. It's not the suffering. And I learned that. So this is again like a really big part of my work as well, because I have suffered from that a lot. Like after my younger brother died, I was 17, and you can imagine a teenage girl without any support. It was horrible. And for
mm,
years, decades, I was bracing constantly for a grief trigger, because it would just hit me from anywhere, and I would be in a state where I would have to leave the room, hide in the toilets, like suffocating, like crying, like they were really violent, very brutal grief
mm,
bombs or grief waves. And so I just changed things I was doing. Like instead of working on them, because I didn't know it was even possible, I thought this is just how it is. That's what happens when you lose the people you love most. So instead of working on them with the knowledge I have now, I wish I had back then, I just changed my context. So I stopped reading novels. Haven't read a novel in decades. Stopped going to the movies. I couldn't take the risk of anything triggering me. I was scared of going into cafes just in case they play a song that my brother loved. And by the time my older brother died a few years ago, I got so angry. Like it makes me emotional to even talk about it. I got so angry because I felt like grief had taken away so many moments. I could have been more mindful with him because I didn't know how to control these grief triggers. And I was so angry that I thought, enough is enough. I'm sick of grief ruling my life, running the show. I'm not going to spend my life like that. I'm going to reclaim control and agency. And now I always say grief is still here, but I'm the boss. I decide. I decide. So when a grief wave, and this takes practice, people are often surprised when I mention that, but it does work. When a wave arrives, you can sense it because they're so familiar. They're like old companions who are just a bit annoying, and you can sense them coming. And when it's there, I tell my grief, I see you, I hear you, I will not ignore you, but now is not the right time. Not now. And then I make an appointment with myself. Let's say Thursday evening, 8 p.m., I'm going to put the candles out, put the sad music on, look at pictures, watch videos, listen to sad songs, cry my eyes out, and really take a moment, give my grief space to be there. It's not comfortable, but that's just how it is. Like the sadness will not vanish. But that has helped me regain agency because I do not want grief to take away moments with the people who are still here and who matter.
Mm.
And that's how it felt. And, it's an ugly truth, but I learned it the hard way. People die, and then other people die, and other people die. So
Mm.
there's a time and a space for grief, but it should not run the show.
That's so powerful. So beautiful. And I'm so sorry that you've had so much grief in your life. It seems irrational and disproportionate, the amount of grief. But we all have to go through it at one point or another. And I'm wondering, because a part of my sort of, I don't know, outlook and philosophy on life is when um, is my beliefs or my thoughts about what happens as the person who's died, where they are and what they are up to, what's happened to their little spirit as their body has not is not functioning anymore, but their spirit and their energy is still alive. Do you find that that is a comfort in like that depth of grief?
Yes, having, quite often religious beliefs or other types of beliefs or an idea and an image of where they could be, a space where
Mm.
our loved ones could be is very helpful because it's reassuring. Again, it just helps the brain to make sense and to visualize
Mm.
them somewhere, somehow, or that idea that we might see them again or that they're giving us signs and to be honest, we don't know. Maybe
No.
it's true, maybe
Yeah.
it's not. No one knows. No one knows. So I think,
Do you know? I mean, I like to think I'm slightly fascinated with people who've had death experiences and have come back and they've been dead officially for, I don't know, 20 minutes or so. And someone brings them back and they're like, okay, this is what I saw, this is what I experienced. And there are a significant number that are all from all over the world of people telling a very similar story about what they have in their post life. I don't know what you call it. um, but they come back to life. And all of them have said what a beautiful, returning to source, really, returning to a space that is just pure love. And and that there are loved ones there. All the loved ones who have passed are there to greet them. And I would be really interested actually to talk to a neurological doctor of some sort who was going to go, well, that's just, the way the brain works. But I simply don't believe that the energy of you, the energy of me, the energy of every soul in this planet just like disappears into thin air because, well, mostly because of the law of the perpetual transmutation of energy. It's like an impossibility to destroy energy, and we are energy. So
yes,
our energy
yes,
must go somewhere.
yes,
Ergo, you know, there's that place. Don't know where it is.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And like you say, yeah, you're right. We are energy, and that energy must go somewhere. But we don't know, and to this day, there's no scientific explanation as to what happens. So yeah, it's open to us to feel certain things, to get certain signs, to like that's a very individual experiment, and no one can tell, oh no, that's not true, or that's not possible, or that's just in your head, or
Yeah,
we don't know, maybe it's
because
not,
nobody
maybe
knows
it's very real.
exactly.
Exactly, nobody knows.
And this is a great freedom of being a human, is that actually we can choose to believe that. And and if that fact, that gives you comfort, I know I've talked to my parents are very old. They're very active. Currently on holiday on some gorgeous beach somewhere. So we don't feel sorry
Lovely.
for them at all. But there they are, 84, nearly 90, and enjoying their life
Wow.
to the full. And I talk to them a lot about it because they're both kind of like, oh, well, when you die, it's over. That's that. And I'm like, well, no, think about it another way. You don't know that for sure. And when I talk to them about it, it gives them so much comfort because they're like, oh, we're going to be together afterwards. And that's a good thing that you've,
Yeah.
had that thought.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, yeah.
that's
There is a
really
lovely
touching.
Jewish story or legend or about two twins in the womb, a boy and a girl. And I can't
Mm,
remember exactly the ins and outs. So if there are any people out there who know it better than me, please forgive me if I make any mistakes. But the idea is that they're in the womb and they're about to come out, and they're having that conversation. And one says, "This is it. It's soon. It's over. That's it. We're gonna get out of here and it's going to be over." And the other one says, "Well, we don't know. Maybe it's amazing out there. Maybe." "What do you mean amazing?" "Well, maybe we'll be able to walk and talk, and maybe we can feel the sun on our skin." And the other one says, "Oh no, that's not, absolutely not. Like, we have everything we need here. We're perfectly comfortable. We're being fed without having to do anything. Why do you always want more, more, more? When this is over, it's over." And then the one who thinks there might be something outside says, "But what about the mother?" And the skeptical replies, "What do you mean, the mother? There's no such thing. Have you ever seen the mother?" And she says, "No, but I believe she's all around us. I believe she's everywhere." He says, "No, have you seen her?" And she says, "No, I haven't, but I think when I'm still and quiet, I can hear her." And it's such a beautiful story. And it's a reminder of these conversations that people might have. And in the end, we don't know, we don't know.
mm.
So we might as well believe in the beautiful option, right?
Absolutely. Sylvia, I think that's a really beautiful place to leave it on that note of kind of optimism and wonder. But I'm so grateful to you for taking the time. Really, your time is precious, and the fact that you've taken this time to, talk to me about all this and talk to all my listeners about this I really, really appreciate it so much. It's really very special what you do and very, very valuable. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Well, right back at you, Roseanne. Thank you for giving me, a space to talk about this, for the work you do, for sharing your love for mindfulness and meditation, and also for being open to have a conversation about grief, because, as you said, everyone will experience it. And it's really a shared responsibility. We have to open up the conversation so that maybe we are a little less unprepared when it happens. So,
Mm.
thank you very much for your very insightful questions and a
Mhm.
very authentic and lovely conversation today.
Yeah, it's been really fun. Before we go, tell people how they can get hold of you and get in touch with
It's
you.
very simple. My website is my name, sylviawolfer.com, and you'll find everything there, from a lot of free resources, guided meditations, articles, to online courses and one-to-ones. And so everything is on my website.
Perfect. Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you so much.